Hey guys, it's SD, your host of the Life Picks Relationship podcast, where people with all sorts of backgrounds, challenges, and life experience show us how they make their relationship extraordinary. Hey guys, hope you're having an awesome day and enjoyed the past episode of Anna Nasty Shearer's story of healing out loud, and maybe you are starting to heal too. Today we have another guest who will help us with healing. Actually teaches adults social and emotional skills. And if you know anything about me, you know that I love such topic. He is the founder of Zensa, an institution for relationship intimacy, and his name, Thomas Westenholz. Thank you so much, Thomas, for being here. You want to start by telling us how you got into teaching adults social and emotional skills?
Yeah, and I think it came from my background. So 7 years ago, I started creating social and emotional learning programs for children and putting it into schools here in the UK. And as I did that, and the kids were learning how to be more self-aware about their emotions, their sensations, how to express those to others and engage socially with others and create strong bonds, I started to realize that these were the skills that adults were missing in adult relationships, because we never learned this stuff, right? We just learned that, you have a spark with somebody and then that's a foundation for a relationship. That's what Hollywood tells us. But sadly, as most of us are figuring out, that's just not true. That's just a dump of chemicals, like taking drugs, that makes us a bit obsessed with another person for a while. And it's not at all what love is. So therefore, I went to San Francisco and studied somatic relationship and sexuality. And that kind of got me on that journey of starting to then also implement all this I have learned and working with different experts around the world and teaching this to adults and how they can use that in their romantic relationships.
So cool. So what top 3 social and emotional skills do you think are crucial for a relationship?
Number 1 is probably regulation. So the fact that we often don't realize when we are in a relationship is you're essentially 2 nervous systems that start intertwining. And the closer you are, the stronger attached you are to that person, the more that person impacts your nervous system. And there's even been research studies where they would get people to rate how closely they felt to their partner, and then they would expose one of the partners to something stressful, and the partner would then come in and just comfort them by putting a hand on them or something similar to that. And they would measure their nervous system, and people that rated that they felt they had a secure attachment, you could see a significant reduction in their stress level by their partner touching them. While if you looked at people that had rated themselves as not being securely attached, they didn't have that same impact on their nervous system to be able to comfort their partner. So being able to both, I would say, regulate ourselves and our partner, because essentially 2 human beings coming together in a relationship is these 2 nervous systems, all the different triggers we have from the past, etc., all the things that make us feel good, interlinking and intertwining with each other and impacting each other. And if we don't know how to regulate that system, it's either going to become hyperactive, which is anxiety and fear, or it's going to become too low active, which is boredom and disengagement, right? So being able to both know how to stimulate each other, but also calm each other down when we start getting triggered.
How do you calm your partner down? You're not changing your partner.
No, this is not at all about changing our partner, because it's very important to understand we can't control other people, but we can have an impact. And calming your partner down is what we call co-regulation. And essentially what co-regulation is ways that you can calm down your partner's nervous system and activate what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is when we become calm. And you can do that with many ways. You can do that with touch. You can do that with eye contact. You can do that in your tonality. If I raise my voice, then that will start triggering and raising your nervous system. You will start becoming more anxious and defensive. If I lower it and talk really calmly and peacefully, and my gestures are also non-threatening, then your nervous system will calm down. So like I said, touch, tonality, eye contact, a hug is a great way. I think what's important to understand, though, is co-regulation. Regulating your partner works really well if it's an external threat. So let's say somebody's really upset because they had a bad time with their boss at work and they come home and they're really stressed. Then we can co-regulate each other really well. But if you as a partner are the trigger, co-regulation doesn't work very well, because if I made you upset and I go touch you, you very likely don't want my touch in that moment, because your brain is perceiving me as that threat, right? And that's where self-regulation come in, where we need to learn a skill to regulate our own nervous system so we don't end up in these toxic conflict cycles every time we're triggered and trigger each other. And then we end up having a fight that leads us nowhere because we're not addressing the underlying issues and triggers. So self-regulation, if you think about what is it when we get triggered in relationship, it's essentially a fight or flight response. We're that simple. It really is very, very simple at its core. And what are we supposed to do when we are triggered in that way? Biologically, you're supposed to to basically move your body. You were supposed to either run away from the threat or physically fight the threat to survive. That's what that system is made for. So yet we live in a society where we don't use movement. And when we're triggered, the best thing to do to calm yourself down is to move. And that could be go for a run, walk around quickly to your house to calm down. It could be go punching your pillow. It could be having a dance in the living room. Whatever it is, move your body. And also if you combine that with slow, deep breathing, that again activate that nervous system that calms you down, then you will start self-regulate and you will be able to suddenly engage with your partner again.
Exactly, because emotions are energy and they need to leave our body. Now, going back to co-regulation, I think that is great, but we have to be really aware that while we're co-regulating, we're not trying to change the other person, like you said, because you might think, okay, so I'm going to go and touch my partner and try to calm them down, but you're really just have to view it more from what can I do in this situation to help the other person, rather what can I do to control or to change the other person.
Absolutely. And I think, the whole idea, and people often ask me questions about, what can I do to get my partner to do what I want? And I say, you can't control another person. So let's go back and focus to you. Or how can I get this kind of man? People will ask me. I said, you can't control that, but you can work on yourself. So you will attract a different kind of man and you will be attracted to a different kind of man, etc. So you're spot on with that. And yet we have to understand that a relationship is a system, that when we are relating, we are not two individual nervous systems. We are interlinked and become a system together, which is also why when we talk about safety and attachment style, people often say, oh, so I'm anxiously attached, I'm avoidant attached, or whatever they are, and say, so does that mean I can't have a secure attachment? And I say, no, not at all. If you have the knowledge and understand your attachment needs and your partners, and you can give that to each other, you together can create a secure relationship attachment as a system interlinking together. And that's quite important to understand.
Exactly. It starts with being self-aware, and then you can move on from there, from regulating and changing your attachment styles and all those things. Okay. So one skill you said was regulation, which I think is super important. What else do you think is really important?
This is very interesting because I think we live in a culture that really stigmatize and shame us showing up in our vulnerability and be able to actually share what our needs really are. And, it comes very much from this glorification of individualization. We get praised, and if people feel they're confident, if they say, oh, I'm fine on my own, I can do things on my own, and I used to be like this. And this idea that it's strong to be on our own and that we shouldn't need others make it very difficult to express when we have needs, that we actually do need others, because we're social creatures by default. So starting to get away, first of all, with this shame that we put on this culture, and then teaching people how to sense into what their needs are and how to be able to express that in a vulnerable way. Because again, a lot of resentment are built up in relationships. And again, I say resentment is a wonderful emotion and sensation to have, because again, we often try to categorize emotions as good or bad, but there are no good or bad emotions. They are literally just signals. Just like when you feel hungry, it's trying to tell you to eat. When you're cold, it's telling you to put on a jacket. When you feel resentment, it's telling you that either your boundaries are probably being repeatedly violated, or more likely there's needs of yours that are important that are not being fulfilled. And if we can learn to listen to those emotions and uncover those needs, we will have much more successful relationships. So I think that's another part that's super important. And also it's where intimacy is created, because once we're able to be emotionally naked with our partner, and our partner is able to meet us with acceptance. And again, I want to say acceptance is not the same as agreement, because people always say, oh, but I don't want to give them that, or I don't agree with that. You don't have to agree. Acceptance is just acknowledging somebody else's experience of the world, right? And being able to accept them for how they see the world, how they experience it. And again, this is really important skill to learn to be able to have a functional, intimate relationship.
Someone who has a really hard time with vulnerability, how do you suggest they start going and becoming more vulnerable?
It's a good question, and it comes back to this concept of safety. Without safety, none of the other skills will work, because our most fundamental need as human beings is to feel safe. When we don't, like I said, our fight or flight kicks in and the rest of the brain doesn't function well anymore. And we have to come back into what's called the window of tolerance. So I think the first thing is to be able to create safety. And like you said, people will say, and it makes sense because we've grown up and we learned we have to adapt, right? We have to adapt and act in a certain way to be accepted by parents, to be accepted in school, to be accepted by our friends, our colleagues, mistakes. So we learned that we have to hide all these things away because they won't be accepted. And like I said, we're social creatures. So being accepted is inherent and very, very important for us. And when we hide all these parts away, we shut down that intimacy. But again, how do we learn to start being safe? I think is starting understanding what is it that's vulnerable for you. And then what I normally recommend is rating these vulnerabilities. And I did this myself, where I rated them from 1 to 10, 1 being something that, yeah, if you laughed at that, it wouldn't feel that great, but it's not a big deal. And 10 being, if you laughed in my face about that, it would be really devastating. And then I would start just sharing small vulnerabilities and see how does the other person respond. And that's learning how to judge other people's emotional capacity. If the person, my partner, start being really judgmental, then yeah, I probably wouldn't share a level 2 or 3 vulnerability. If they're really accepting and meet me there and say, oh, that sounds great, then I might expose more, and slowly you build up that trust with somebody new. I look at how do they interact with other people. Are they judgmental when they talk about other people? If they are, again, maybe I would be a bit more hesitant sharing with them. If they are accepting and stand up for other people, then they're probably more safe. So I start looking for these safety signals that tell me that this is a person that's safe to open up. And then slowly, as I gauge their response, I will know, okay, this is a person that's able to meet me in vulnerability.
Yeah, that's really interesting to go and number them and say, okay, this is only a little bit hard for me to say, and this is really hard for me to say, and let's see what's going to happen. But sometimes what people consider one of a vulnerability, other people don't. So if you were to share with them something major, like a trauma that happened in the past or something that you feel really vulnerable about, then they're not going to laugh at you in the face because they know that it's major. But if it's something really small, like a 1 or 2, and for you, it's really hard to say, but they don't think that it's very hard, then they might laugh at you because they think it's just a chill thing. So they're going to laugh. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's a good point because you're right. Of course, different things are vulnerable to different people. And I think, first of all, we could express to the other person that what we're sharing right now is vulnerable. That's a good way to preempt the misjudgment or misunderstanding that might happen in an example you just gave. So I would say this is really vulnerable for me, but I really want to share this with you. Now that person already knows. And again, I would only do this in the first place. I would never share trauma with somebody I just met, right? So I would only do it once I've gone through this and build up this trust over a significant amount of time. And then I said I would sit down in a safe environment and I would express that this is something that's, really touched me a lot and it's really hard for me to share, but I would love to share with them, whether they are willing to find a space where they can hear that. Because also it's about checking in with the other person, because often we have this presumption that the other person is in the same place we are and want the same thing as we do, but they don't. They have their own ecosystem, right, of needs, of desires, of capacity. So I would also check in with the other person and say first, is this something, that you're able to listen to right now? Because if my partner just come home from work and is exhausted and had a really bad day, they might not have capacity to hold that, and it might not be a good time to share that vulnerability, right? But if they then say, yeah, actually I had a great day and I feel really energized, so let's sit down, and then we sit down together, have eye contact, and then we share. So that's another important point to just do. Always check in where the other person is too before launching into your big vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it prepares not only the other person, but also prepares you. Like, it creates that space, like, okay, now I could go and see this. So what else could we do to make it feel safe so we stay constantly safe in our relationship?
So first of all, I want to say there's no way to ever stay constantly safe, because the fact is inherent. We're two different people from two different backgrounds with different needs, desires, boundaries. So inevitable, there will be disappointment in relationship. And I think what's important is to know how to deal with disappointment. So there's one way of dealing with disappointment that become really disconnecting, and another one that brings us closer together. So if one of us has disappointment, if I disacknowledge and just say, that's your problem, you deal with that, that will become very disconnecting, as again, our core need is to be seen and heard and acknowledged. If I instead say, I can't give you that because it somehow violate my boundaries, but I'm here with you and I want to listen to you express your disappointment, and whenever you need to express that, I'll be here and listen to you. Suddenly that can become a really connecting experience, right? And also another part is, if safety is broken, it's about very quickly having repair and very quickly go into repair and be able to listen to the other person of what caused that breach of safety, and be able to acknowledge the pain that might have caused, and then take responsibility for that and make it clear how you might act differently in the future. And again, you don't have to agree. People often get stuck in this debate where they say, you did this, no, I didn't do that. And again, they're both triggered and it become a debate on the logical details. The logical details of what happened is not that important. What's actually important is the emotional impact it had on your partner. So you don't have to justify it defend your character. You don't even have to agree with how they describe events. Try and focus on the emotion, like you said, that your partner now, for whatever reason, feel unsafe. And what you actually need to do is restore safety. And once you've done that, all the accusations will go away. So you don't have to debate the details anyway. So therefore, just focus on how did it make them feel, acknowledge that. And then you can probably also realize that whether you agree with how things happened, you don't want to have that impact on your partner. So you can say, I'm sorry that I made you feel that way. You're not apologizing necessarily for the practical steps of what happened, because you could disagree on that, but you're apologizing for the impact it had, right? And then you take responsibility for that. And that way you can very quickly heal and restore that safety before it become a bigger breach.
Yes, I absolutely love that. I just think, again, like there's a flip. So you want to say, I'm sorry to your partner for making them feel that way. But at the same time, if you're the one accepting the apology, accept it, but realize that by the end of the day, there's no one that can make you feel that way besides for yourself. So maybe they said something that triggered you and that's why you feel like that. And you want to discuss that and work that out. But it's that careful balance of saying, okay, I realize that my partner's here for me and things are all safe, but at the same time, not trying to blame them and taking responsibility for your own life.
And this is where it comes back to learning skills of self-regulation, because people that can self-regulate, they're normally also securely attached, because exactly what you said, that they have trust in themselves. The fact is, when we struggle to, and when we need somebody else, or even become codependent on somebody else, is when we are not able to regulate ourselves, right? Then we are suddenly dependent on this person to regulate our nervous system. And that doesn't become a healthy dynamic, because now we're not engaging just from a place of connection and secure base. We are doing it because we really need them and feel insecure if we're on our own. So this is why it's so important to practice these self-regulation practices. And we mentioned a few of them before: learning movement, learning how to breathe slowly and get back in touch with center yourself. Because that way, once we trust that we can cope with our own emotions doesn't seem scary anymore. The reason most people run away from their emotions or need to get comfort from other people is because they haven't learned to be with those emotions and regulate themselves down. So emotions to them seem really, really scary. So you're right. At the end of the day, we are responsible. And this is where I come back to that skill we talked about in the beginning, why that is so important.
Okay, so if a person wants to self-regulate, when at the actual initiate, like when it happens and like your immediate reaction reflex is to go and run away from it, what could they go and do at that moment?
I think in right that moment when they feel like running away, that's what they should do. Then they should run, because at that point, if they're feeling that strongly, they're probably outside their window of tolerance. And most of the practices that teach you this over time doesn't work if you're highly triggered. At that point, all you need to do is move. It's the only thing that will regulate you down. You need to move. You need to follow how the biological system is designed. So they basically need to move. Like I said, whether that's punching your punching bag, go for a run, doing your dance, whatever it is, you need to move. Only once you're calm, you can start doing some of the other practices. And there are loads of them to start regulating ourselves down. It could even be, if I'm in a place where, in a public place where I can't start necessarily dancing or suddenly start running around. Maybe I'm just about to go on stage, whatever it might be. Then there's other ways I regulate myself. It could be clenching my hands together and squeezing them really, really tight and then slowly letting go. And you will feel that sends a signal to your body to then go back into relaxation. So there's lots of different strategies that people work with. Also somatic therapists will work with that can teach you how to regulate also somatically through using your body, which you asked me, I think, to give you 3 tips that people should learn. And I think the third one would be exactly that, to learning how to be present with our sensations. Because again, we are in an educational system and a world where we grow up to value and educate our higher cortex, our thinking brain, our thought processes, etc., our logical part of our brain. And, we're starting to work now with the emotional brain, but now we are looking at the third layer, which is somatic, meaning sensation, how you sense in your body. And why is this important for relationships? Because most things, are actually all impressions that come through your sensory system, get processed super quick. And the first place to sense what's going on is in our body. But we haven't learned this. So most of us are completely unaware. And by the time you realize cognitively and your thought process, I don't like what that person did because they shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z, it's often too late. You have already been violated. You've already gone too far to what you actually wanted to do, right? And again, for example, even in peer pressure, you can sense in your body instantly if something does doesn't feel good. If you learn to tune into that, you will know instantly. And you can say, actually, I don't want to do this. But often people don't listen to their body. So they go along with something and later they realize, oh, I didn't want to do that. And again, you can sit and do exercises with somebody you trust. I would only do this with somebody I trust. And you could talk to them about things that might feel violating to you. And then that person can slowly escalate. And all you have to do is sit and sense in your body how it feels. And as soon as it feels violating, you say stop. Don't endure, don't caretake, just say stop.
So it should be done purposely to set up the trigger, and you could practice feeling that emotion.
That's right. And of course, like I said, only with a very trusted person.
For sure.
And that's right, because that's how you start sensing in your body, how does it feel when something doesn't feel right to me anymore? And when you're able to do this, for me, I know it's when my stomach tenses up. I know it's I get tense in my jaw. And the good thing about knowing this is once you know these signals, you can stop really early before you run outside your window of tolerance and then end up in a really destructive argument that leads nowhere. I'm able to say, okay, I can feel my nervous system is kicking in now. Adrenaline is taking place. It's already in my body. I need to regulate myself. And I know this because I'm in tune with my body. But if I wasn't, if I'm stuck in my thinking brain all the time, I wouldn't notice this. And by the time I realize it, it will be too late. So again, teaching how to be present with our sensation. And I teach my son this, when he comes home and he say, oh, I got bullied, I feel really sad. I said, where do you feel that in your body? And that's how we start teaching people. He'll say, oh, I feel tension in my stomach. Okay, so that's how you feel when you start feeling sad. You feel tension in your stomach. And I said, let's sit and breathe a bit and just feel our stomach. This is an interesting part because often what people are running away from is the discomfort they feel somatically in their body that is created through these emotions. And when we learn we can be with those, suddenly emotions are actually not dangerous anymore. We realize that, oh, it's just tension in my stomach. That's all it is. It's really not that dangerous. And if I sit and breathe with it, wow, it starts relaxing and it actually goes away. And suddenly these emotions are not that dangerous. Suddenly feeling rejected doesn't feel that dangerous anymore because we now taught ourselves and realize that all it is actually tension in my stomach and I can deal with that. And suddenly it becomes much easier to engage emotionally with your partner not from a place of fear, but from that place of vulnerability because we feel safe in ourselves.
Exactly. It changes your relationship with emotion. So it changes a whole lot of other things around you. A lot of kids, when they're angry or they cry, their parents tell them to calm down, but that's just telling them to push their emotions away. Here instead, you're teaching your son how to deal with his emotions.
And I would say even also encouraging it, because you're right, and also I encourage him to express his emotions. So that can be in different ways. So for example, he said, oh, I want to cry, but boys don't cry. I said, who told you that nonsense? I said, your daddy cries and I'm very strong. I used to do cage fighting. I built businesses. I'm very strong and I cry. Because again, crying is actually neurologically a way that our brain heals from being wounded. So it's very important to allow ourselves to express it. And this is again, allowing the emotions to be expressed physically. That's what crying is. It's a physical expression of how you feel. And same with anger. If he says, I feel really angry, guess what? I'll allow him to express it somatically. I'll say, do you want to punch a pillow? Should I hold it? And he say, yeah. And then he punches and then he regulates down. And now we can start talking about what it is that's caused this and how we can solve it. But we can only do that when I regulate him down. That would be impossible when he's sad or when he's angry, etc. And the same with your partner, because these patterns that we learn are those that then repeats themselves in our relationships as adults. And often I read this advice when I looked on different forums and people say, oh, how do I get over my ex? People often say, oh, just find a new one. The best way to get over, date somebody new. And it's not true, because what that is a strategy of numbing. And it's again somebody who can't be present with the pain. So a much more productive way is to not go into straight to a new relationship and relive the same pattern again, but look at what happened in this relationship and reflect on yourself and what can you learn and what can you do different, and then be present and heal that pain. And when you've done that, then you can then engage in a relationship and hopefully create a much better dynamic next time. So it's really getting away from this culture of numbing. If you look at it, we live in a culture that's all about numbing, whether it's staring at the TV to not feel, to just be distracted, whether it's being on a screen, whether it's jumping straight to the next partner and just swiping, because there's always something there that can numb the pain. But it's drinking alcohol, taking drugs. It's numbing, because we didn't learn as kids how to engage in this way I'm describing here. And if we want nurturing relationships, that's a skills we need to learn.
For sure. Usually people who don't feel their emotions, they just run away from it. They don't know what's happening. But once you start feeling your emotions, you'll notice how different emotions will feel different in your body. So sometimes you might feel it in your stomach, sometimes you might feel it in your neck, and sometimes in your back. And then you'll be able to identify exactly which emotions is it. There's a difference between sad, angry, frustrated, disappointed, and everything else. So the more you do it, the better you'll get at it, and you'll be more pinpoint on and know exactly how to deal with it.
That's right. And also, I think that kind of brings me back because we were talking about sensation in relation to boundaries. And I think this is, again, so important because one of the main things that create resentment in relationships and eventually kill relationships is that resentment build up over time because we again and again allow our boundaries to be violated. And it comes from this culture. Again, a lot of women are raised in this idea they have to be nice little girls and they have to caretake other people's emotions. So they do that at expense of themselves. And I'm not saying men never do this. It's just more prominent for a lot of women that have been raised that way because of our culture. But when we do that, again, like I said, eventually it will kill intimacy, of course, and eventually probably cause relationship breakdown. Remember that you never have to give a justification for why you have a boundary. All your boundaries are valid, and you can simply say, this doesn't feel good right now. And once you can do that, it opens up so much freedom. What people often don't realize, people think that freedom is having no boundaries, being able to do whatever we want. It's not. Freedom is found within boundaries. And that's the interesting part, that once, let's say, with you, that you will be able to express your boundaries to me. Guess what? That would make me feel much more free in the way I interact with you, because now I don't have to tiptoe around worried that I'll do something that hurt you. I know if you don't like something, you'll say it, and that makes me feel much more free to just express, knowing that you can take care of yourself. And it also allows more freedom for you. So many women tell me that they worry a bit about flirting or starting something because they don't always want it to go to sex, but then they feel an obligation. If they trusted their own boundaries, they could flirt completely freely, and whenever they wanted things to stop, they could just say, oh, this is as far as I want to take it right now, right? And having that trust in ourselves allow us then to play more and be more open. And again, it creates a much more healthy dynamic in a relationship.
You could enjoy everything else that you're doing because you're not worried. Maybe they're going to go and do something that I don't like. I'm going to hate this afterwards. No, you have your boundary. Until there, you live life fully. And when that boundary stops, you stop as soon as you want. And that's it. Now, how has this knowledge of all emotional regulation, of marriage, of everything affected your own relationship?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think a lot of this started for me actually through a breakdown of my marriage with my wonderful ex-wife, and I have 2 kids with her. She said to me, I love you so much, but I didn't feel that you loved me. And it made me really sit down and reflect, because I think she was right. And of course that was very painful for her. And then as I started to understand this more, then I remember, because we basically did therapy afterwards. I think it's very important if you have a relationship breakdown, and especially if there's kids, to do therapy, both because you can both heal your wounds so you don't take them on to the next relationship, and it will allow you still have to relate in some way. So getting rid of all that resentment is a wonderful thing. So we did that, and I realized it's because I didn't have the capacity to love. So I said, it wasn't about you, it was about that I couldn't do this with anyone because I was so closed off and shut down myself. And I said, the fact is, I need to start practicing these skills that I know and that I understand very well and that I teach to kids, and it worked really well. And then I started engaging and doing that for myself, and it opened up not just a different way to relate in romantic relationships, but I would say in all relationships, also how I relate to my friends, to my family. I had old issues that made me shut off to my parents. I wouldn't share with them and feel intimate, that we sat down and healed, and I took them through the repair process, which was wonderful. And now we have a much better relationship. It related to all my friends that I never shared any intimate things with, and always just got praise because I built business, and they would say, you're so great, but I didn't feel connected to them because it somehow felt fake. Now I could suddenly sit with them and have a cry and say that I'm afraid of my son have a life limited condition or what might happen to him, and suddenly I started feeling seen and therefore connected, and I could give the same to them. So I would say it changed all my relationships. And this is what's so important to remember, because again, even though we talk about romantic relationships now, we shouldn't put everything on a romantic relationship. This is how we should learn to relate to everyone. And a beautiful study at Harvard University on well-being and happiness that took place over 70 plus years, I think it's even still going now, the longest study ever on human happiness, found that the biggest factor that correlated with our well-being and happiness throughout life was the quality of our relationships. And it's so important that we put this on multiple relationships and not just all in our romantic relationship to carry that. So I would really say it just changed how I related to everyone, not just in a romantic capacity.
For sure. It goes back to, like we said in the beginning, that when you're self-regulated and you could identify your own emotions and deal with them, then it overflows to every single other area of your life. So you'll know how to relate to your friends and to your colleagues and everyone else who you interact with in general in a totally different way.
That's right. And also, I think it took away this shame. I've grown up very much in the male culture. You have the same in America as we have over here, that men should not express emotions, right? And we should be seen as strong, which means in our culture that we have it all together and don't need anyone. So I very much lived that life, and being able to accept. And as I started to study and read and dealt with neuroscientists and read about the social brain, I started to realize we are wired to need each other, and we all need each other, and it's okay. And as that shame felt away, it suddenly became so much easier to start engaging and expressing myself and my needs in a vulnerable way. I could suddenly say, if I came home and was stressed, that I need a touch from my partner, and I say, I feel really stressed, I would really love to have a cuddle. I would never have said that before. And of course, that created a much more intimate, emotionally engaging relationship. But first, I had to get rid of all that shame. And to do that was to accept that actually the strongest we can ever be is being able to be vulnerable. That's the most confident we can ever be. And the fact that it's okay to need others. And again, we have these labels that we often put on and saying, oh, that person is needy. The problem with that is when we shame people, they shut down and they don't express what their underlying needs are. And that creates dysfunctional relationships.
Yeah. Do you see that since you've changed and become more self-regulated, the way people act to you is different?
Yes, of course it is, because again, people feel more safe, and it makes them feel more safe, both because I'm much more accepting now. So it makes it much easier for other people to open up because I lead with vulnerability, which makes it easier for other people to be vulnerable and share things. I have lots of people say, oh, I never shared this with anyone but you, because they can sense that I'm safe, which makes sense. I am, because I'm judgmental, much more accepting. And like you said, they don't feel they have to caretake me because they can sense I can regulate myself. As an example, with my wonderful ex-wife, and she's a wonderful human being and we get on really well, but sometimes she will get triggered. She have a stressful day and she'll call me up and offload something that upset her many years ago that just comes up for her again. And again, in that place, I'm able to regulate. I breathe really calmly. I remind myself this has nothing to do with me. It's her projections. And then I can calmly, rather than I used to assert boundaries only through anger and aggression, because that's again what I'd learned, I can really calmly say to her, I really want to hear what your underlying needs are, what you need right now, but I don't want to listen to this anger and blame. That you need to deal with a therapist or your friend. I'm not your basket for offloading anger. So I said, calm yourself down and then you can contact me and I'll listen to what you need. And guess what happened? Then we hang up and a few hours later, she apologized and she called me up and said what she actually needed. And again, that was able to happen because one, I reassured her, which is part of the safety element, that I was here to listen to her and I did care. I said, I want to hear your needs, right? So it's not just me rejecting her, disacknowledging her and say, oh, I don't want to listen to you, goodbye. So that made her regulate more, right? Because she felt at least she was acknowledged and I was willing to engage with her. And at the same time, I set my clear boundary. I said, if you don't stop offloading your anger, then I'm going to hang up right now and then we can speak later. And then again, we had a wonderful talk and everything was fine and life was back to normal. So of course it changed the way people relate to us when we are able to again regulate ourselves.
So do you think in that situation, right, that was with your ex, if it would happen with your wife now, if you would be married to her, that would be different because then you're coming from a different point of letting her vent?
No, not necessarily, because I think the fact is that if it's just offloading anger and resentment towards me, then nothing productive will come from that. I'm human too, and no matter what amount of skill set and practice, the fact is I also have a system wiring that looks out for potential threats. And if I suddenly feel attacked, that system is start kicking in and then we both get triggered and I know it won't go anywhere. And also I'm always willing to listen to her underlying needs. But again, I don't take responsibility for her emotions, and I know I'm responsible for mine, not for hers. Therefore, I don't feel necessarily at all that, no, I have to be there for her to just offload anger, not at all. And if I feel that's violating or toxic or not good for me, then again, I would do exactly the same. I would say, listen, I want to hear you, but I can't hear you right now because you're attacking me. So I'm going to remove myself and then we can both calm ourselves down and then we can meet here again in wherever when we feel like it. And then we can express this in a vulnerable way, because when we start with blame and anger, the other person can't hear us. They will automatically go into their fight or flight response. Again, it's how we are wired. So nothing will come from that. So we both have to regulate, right?
Yeah.
And again, it could be that I can calm her down. I could ask her, do you want a hug right now? And then if she just keep offloading on me, I'll say, actually, this is not okay for me. I really want to help you and listen to you. And I care about your needs, but I don't want to be offloaded on in this way. And then I would remove myself and say, I'll come back and listen to you when you calm down.
Yeah. That's really clear. Get boundaries in play. That was awesome. Okay, great. Any last piece of advice advice?
There's so much advice. I remember a guy who asked me, how do I make women like me? And I said, first of all, it's not the right way of thinking. You shouldn't go around trying to make women like you. You should focus on how you can like yourself. But I think I said the biggest gift that you can give to a partner, which I think is a better question, is that of acceptance. Because really, like I said, what we all fundamentally want is to be seen and accepted for what we are without having to hide away all these things that we felt we couldn't show. So the biggest gift we can give anyone is to be an accepting human being. And if you struggle with that, if you are judgmental, go educate yourself. Read books to understand other people's perspective. Talk to other people and trying to listen to how they see the world. Travel. The more you can get out and understand other people, the more accepting you will become when you understand. And again, it's part of what we teach kids. We teach them how to reflect, and when somebody is upset with them, we will try to get them to understand the other person's perspective. It's part of developing what we call cognitive empathy, and we can do that too as adults. So we are able to have this skill to be able to, like I said, accept them and acknowledge them even if we don't agree. And I think that is the biggest gift that we can give somebody in a relationship.
Oh yes, I totally agree with that. Thank you so much, Thomas, for coming on here and sharing with us really important skills that for some reason they don't teach us in school. Guys, go and educate yourself. Go to zensa.com. I'll put the links in the show notes and go learn more of what Thomas has to say. Thank you so much, Thomas. This was awesome.
It's been my pleasure.
Did you enjoy that episode? Could you do me a personal favor and subscribe and leave a review? It would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much and have an awesome day.